Record to the computer. There you go. I have a preamble as well. I apologize, it's not funny. I'll try. Hi everybody, what's going on? It's Tuesday the 6th of February 2024. My name is Lorne Riseley, thank you very much for joining me. Candidly, I have no cognitive dissonance when I say I'm absolutely thrilled, or rather in so much as it's possible to be humanly thrilled, to be joined by a successful broadcaster, creator, podcaster, radio host, writer, presenter, analyst, and beard aficionado. He is, for many, including myself, the final word in MMA coverage. He's one of the most tenured, experienced, and indeed finest analysts working in the sport today, having interviewed the biggest names, produced some of the most intellectual and thought-provoking content in the sphere, and has continued to push the standards and possibilities within MMA and boxing coverage at all levels of its presentation. And he did all this with Brian Campbell as the Jar Jar Binks to his Qui-Gon Jinn. No small feat indeed. Goobers, donks, donkettes, it really must be a frosty day in hell. Let's get this party started, shall we? It's Luke Thomas.
What an intro. What an intro. I don't know how much of that was truthful, but it was a very nice intro, and for that I am quite grateful. Thank you for having me.
The sign of a talented individual is always self-deprecation and the denial of any praise, but I'm going to get straight to it because this is a question I've wrestled with how to ask you for years. And it's distilled into one word: why? When it all comes down to it, why do you conduct yourself in the way that you do on your live streams, on your radio show, on your sports programs? Why do you hold yourself accountable? Why do you hold others to a consistent standard? And why do you endure all of the kickback that comes along with that? Why do you stay balanced, nuanced, and informed in an era that doesn't seem to want to place the commensurate value on that when compared to the more reactionary or incendiary style of content that you tend to see today?
Yeah. So, I mean, a few things I would say in response to that. I think the first thing I would say is, and we just have to be honest, like, in terms of trying to deliver reasonable content, in terms of trying to being aware of any biases that one might have, and then trying to account for them and provide coverage in a way where you are aware of potential blind spots or whatever, like the kind of coverage that you're sort of describing. I unevenly get that right, and I think folks should be honest. Like, there's a sort of view about, like, oh, these people do this, they get it right. I don't get it right nearly as often as I would like. That doesn't mean that the attempt is not worth it, but I don't have an unblemished record as it relates to that kind of a thing. So that's just not to deny that there is something different about what I do potentially, but to the extent that it is successful in principle is itself not always true, certainly. The basic idea is this. I realize that there are, and especially like the last turn of the fan base and the last 2 to 3 years, you're beginning to notice even more kind of pushback on it. I would say one thing about the pushback is that it's real, and so what you're observing, you're not making it up. But I don't get nearly as bothered by it, believe it or not, as like people around me who observe it. Like, they're like, oh, did you see what so and so said? I'm like, no, I don't really care. Or did you, there was this thread and it was on some forum and they didn't care for what you had to say, and I'm like, sweet. I try to, on two levels. One, you cannot police the internet. There's just going to be people who are not going to see the world like you or like you in any kind of way. And that's just the way that it's going to be. And you have to understand that. So I don't really try to fight that very actively. There can be times when it gets really serious where you have to, take account of it. But in general, you don't really have to. It's not to say that it doesn't matter, but trying to bother yourself with it day to day, I don't think is necessarily all that productive. And I think the other part too is I don't think it's necessarily all bad. I mean, if these things can generate, like, for example, there's been a few issues where at the time in which I was promoting certain views, not all of them, but certain views, for example, related to performance enhancing drug use in MMA, and some of my criticisms around anti-doping as it was, sort of handed out by USADA, I knew that was going to get pushback. I knew that was not something that a lot of people were going to agree with or ever going to agree with. I don't necessarily try to do what I do to be like, oh, I'm going to be maximally convincing. I don't think I'm going to be maximally convincing. But rather, it's very easy. Dude, it's very, very easy. There's a lot of people in MMA who fashion themselves themselves, independent thinkers, or I march to the my own drum, and these are people that only read what people tell them to. They only, and we live in an age where everything is algorithmically boosted, and there's this homogeneity of what content people like and the way in which they like it, and then the manner in which it's delivered. This homogeneity, people have become, and we're all kind of guilty of this to some level, but there's been a lot of people who become very, very susceptible to this kind of thing and not realized where it's taken them. And I understand that if you challenge any of these conventions, there's going to be people who don't like it, and I totally get that. I just don't give a fuck, to be perfectly honest with you. It is very easy for me to look at situations where there is no one providing an alternative view of something, not just to be a contrarian, not just to be, oh, no one's saying it, so therefore I will say it. That's BS. But rather, are there questions about the limits of anti-doping? And sure enough, the UFC changes their anti-doping policy. Now, there's a lot of things that are wrong with it that folks may not like, and there's parts of it I don't like. But then Jeff Nowitzki gets out there and, for example, and this is one among many things he said, he gets out there and says, yeah, we don't know if it makes sense to punish athletes who are not on an Olympic cycle. So every 4 years, right? Every 4 years of the Olympics. So you get these punishments that are like 2 years, 4 years, 8 years. It doesn't make sense to punish people who are not on an Olympic cycle when they're just professional athletes. Dude, there is a conversation on my YouTube channel that I had with a Scottish academic named Paul DeMeo from 2017, where we were talking about this very issue. So the wheels of justice grind slowly, man, but they fucking grind. They grind. So partly that's a little bit of vindication, some of the things I've been wrong about. But all I try to do, honestly, these days, and I really mean this, all I try to do is I look at whatever conversations people are having. It is so fucking easy in MMA to spot the blind spot, the ideological limit of it, the Overton window on this, and then provide a perspective that clearly is not being accounted for. Honestly, in MMA, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Not to say it's maximally convincing, but it is very easy to spot what everyone considers to be, this is true, this is the only thing that is true, this is what the promoter said, for example, we will just go with that. And then I'm like, well, no, quite obviously that's not true, blah, blah, blah. And then, yes, it engenders a lot of different reactions. That's natural.
I appreciate everything you said there, and I don't disagree with it. And the reason I'm asking the question is because I don't believe it's not useful or even critical. I see parallels with football coverage in this country, for instance, where the majority of people cry out for a more nuanced and a more modern approach to coverage. And yet when they get it, they often criticize it for being too wordy, too intellectual, trying to go too deep, as it were. And then there's also the fact that they approach their audience much like customers and consumers rather than an actual audience of human beings. And yet I never see that with your content. When I see your live streams, there's often a push and pull, a tug and a back and a forth when you consider both possibilities of both arguments, present your own opinions. Even in the way that you deliver your content, you're constantly probing for ideas and do you like this, do you not? And again, I wonder, in a day and age where it would be so easy for someone like you with a fantastic look, massive intellect, good following, and someone who's very clear in his ideas of where he wants to go with things, to just become a bombastic pundit. And yet you're not. You still retain a editorial authority, and I would you're almost like a teacher to a lot of people in many ways, because you kind of offer this and say, look, I'm just offering you it. Do with it as you will, but I'm not going to force you to take it or that my opinion is gospel. Why do you place an emphasis on it? Why do you feel the need, and why do you get satisfaction out of providing that to people?
Well, again, there have been times. I mean, I should, let's sort of talk about the limits of the question that you put in there. Like, it's very nicely, it's a very nice question. It's a very nice generosity of spirit that you're offering. So I appreciate it. I would say that obviously some stuff that I do, you can't, for example, you can't operate on TikTok successfully without some knowledge of how the algorithm works. Same for YouTube, same for Twitter. Like, we all, to some extent, are slaves. And then, there is some transactionalism with the audience. That is true. But what I would say is that it's very, very simple for me to answer this one as well. I try being the operative word. I try to deliver content that I wish was there for me to consume. It's really just does not more complicated than that. I can't watch the one. I mean, yeah, every once in a while, watching someone have an epic breakdown, with a great point, and they're banging their fist down on the desk, and they've got a great, whole shtick going. Yes, that can be quite entertaining. Obviously, like
And
I'm
you
not about
dabble
that
with
either.
that at one point. I remember the Luke Thomas Gets Angry stuff and some of your stuff
Yeah,
on your radio shows and stuff like Donald Trump Jr. is a goober and all this sort of stuff.
yeah.
You've dabbled and you're capable and you're entertaining as hell doing it. And yet part of you still goes, yeah, but I prefer this. You
Yes,
know?
exactly. To your point, I've had a little bit of fun with it as well. Again, I'm not immune from some of these kinds of pressures or interest. Like I was, the Donald Trump Jr. one was just funny because he put up a video of him deadlifting with like the worst fucking form imaginable, and it's like if anyone of a different political persuasion had done that, the people who were supporting it would have killed him, and they wouldn't say anything about it. And I was like, oh my fucking god, like he looked like a cat, that had been electrocuted or something. But it's an old video, whatever. The thing I would just say now is I'm a little bit older too. That's one thing. Like the fan base is just perpetually quite young. And I'm a little bit older, and but more to the point, I honestly feel like in an age where everything is so heavily curated by whatever the algorithm of the platform is. We live in an age of platform dominance that was not true when I first got into media. It was not true at all that was the case. It was more institutional media dominance, and there is something to be said about like that going away and being replaced by something else, but that has drawbacks as well. I just feel like there are people who are asking for things to be slowed down a little bit. There are people who are asking for things to be delivered in a way that is somewhat unusual. I will say, though, you're bringing up a great point, which is someone once said this to me, and I've repeated it to my audiences over time, which is we have more tools now to see actually what people like, what they respond to in terms of the content and when it's delivered, how it's delivered, the subject matter, all this, how it's constructed, how long it is, to your point. There was a tool that I used in the 2010s called Chartbeat, which is this like amazing live analytics platform that you can see what's working, what's not, where people are coming from, how much of it is search, how much are on the art page at one time, all this stuff. The more that media companies got this, in theory, the better their ability to be able to tell what audiences like, and audiences have never been more unhappy. It's just a real bizarre paradox. So I really believe, I don't know that my editorial sense is the best one, but I do believe that trying to break out from some of these prescribed ways of doing things and just cultivating your own version of it based on what you like and what you think other people might like. Again, not all of it will work, but I tend to think that there's a place for that. I guess the way I would put it.
Again, I'm inclined to agree. And I want to read you a quote. It's sourced from the world-renownedly accurate Wikipedia, so take it as you leave it. But I want to see if it relates to your approach to some of this stuff, because I see it in some of the stuff that you make. So why you're an MMA fan, why you like MMA. Struggle and fear, tackled by athleticism, technical know-how, and innate desires for self-preservation brings out a side of humanity that exists only in the deepest recesses of our being. MMA fighting has no peer when it comes to the demands of the sport places on its participants, both physically and psychologically. I love watching that dynamic in action. But then he goes on to say he hates pretty much everything else about the MMA world. So what I want to derive from that is, and you've mentioned as well that you've talked recently about energy regulation and almost treating like your attention like it's a commodity that needs to be traded in exchange for something worthy. Do you look at yourself as someone that provides that kind of content for a world that's ready for it? Or do you look at it as something, again, like a teacher would, in the sense of, I will leave this for you. I hope someone can do something with it? Or do you try to be more activist? I know I'm packing quite a lot into that, and I guess I'm wording it badly, but like, what do you hope to accomplish with your content, with stuff that you make and say? Like, is there an ultimate goal, or is it very much a case of, look, off it goes? It's a bottle into the ocean. I hope someone gets the message.
Boy, that's a great question. I mean, okay. So what I would say is that a lot of times, and this is true for literally everybody, maybe Ariel Helwani would be the exception, but honestly, even with him, this is going to be true to an extent. Part of what we do in the role, and you understand this too, is that, hey, what can I do to just survive? Like what are the jobs that are hiring and what do they want? So like there partly that has been, to be honest, more than any other driver, I think in my career, that's just been perhaps the biggest one. What am I being hired to do? You can, there can be situations where you can tackle that, and you can play with that, and you can have a little bit of freedom to define that. That is true as well, which I've done to an extent, but part of it is just surviving. I would say though that I'm at the stage of my career now where I'm thinking a lot more about these kinds of things. MK inherently, Morning Combat, the podcast I do with Brian Campbell, inherently has a great degree of silliness. That is by design, in part because silliness can be fun, and also because there's a lot of this sport that is inherently unserious, but unserious in a way that's like, I don't know, angry. Like,
it needs to be lampooned to a certain degree in order to realize, oh, actually, this is silly, isn't it? Like, it can take itself too seriously sometimes until it walks back and realizes it.
You're a British guy, so let me ask you a question. Are you a boxing fan? There's no wrong answer to this question. I'm just
asking. Very much so. Yeah.
Okay. So me too, dude. This is the weirdest thing, and I don't have a good answer for this. I have no clue why it's quite like this. I mean, I've got some theories, but none of them are any good. You go to a boxing event, and yeah, there's a couple people with axes to grind, and there's beefs in the crowd and shit like that. But like in general, dude, people are pretty happy to see one another. That is not the way MMA is. In MMA, dude, it's a constant West Side Story, the Jets versus the Sharks. Everyone's got some axe to grind with somebody else. Everyone's kind of pissed off. It's really weird. There's a weird self-seriousness. There's a weird kind of undertone that MK was, in theory, trying to solve for some of that. So the point I'm trying to make is that does make some of the work inherently unserious. But some of the other things I've been able to do, I've had a little bit more focus on. I think I would actually say the next stage of my career will probably be a lot more focus on these kinds of things. Again, it really is not, partly it's a business calculation. What are unexplored things that need to be talked about? What are some angles that we can talk about them, and to what extent is this in any way lucrative? These are questions that you do have to ask yourself. On the other hand, again, it's a very easy opening. Everything is moving, not everything, but lots of things are moving to a direction where, you're seeing this new crop of media, for example, and people want to bash them. I'm not consumers of their content. It's not for me, but it is not in any way lost on me that they just don't, it sounds like I'm going to be killing them for it. I'm actually not. They don't seem to care too much about how the sausage is made. They don't seem to care too much about learning the ins and outs of the fight sport itself. They're just there to kind of chill and have a good time. And honestly, I sort of get that. I get that, like, you got these old crusty guys like me who are like, fighter pay, and then people are like, I'm just here to watch fights. I get that, but I actually do believe that for as much as that might be a big trend in where everything is heading, there is going to be a portion of the audience. There's always going to be curious people. There's always going to be curious people. It really doesn't matter where you go. And I think I would like to, and have to some extent tried, but I would really like to focus my attention on servicing people who can do that. And to your point about like, what impact will that have? I do not know. I have no idea. I don't think of it at all in those terms. I think of it more in, is this something of value? Can I produce it, reasonably speaking? Just do it. And then whatever impact it has is the impact that it has.
I don't mean to underline the silliness point of what you made, but the next question I had is from a cartoon character. Real cartoon character, but a cartoon character nonetheless. Because when I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Tommy Toehold, I didn't intend the conversation to turn into more philosophical aspects of MMA, but when I started asking questions about the fan base and how they treated Ronda Rousey on her exit, for instance, and some of the topics and the hot topics of the day, he reflected on the fact that he said, well, look, dude, I've got to be honest, I'm not, and I'm paraphrasing, but I don't really hold MMA to that higher account when you consider it's guys agreeing to fight in a cage. And these are people that have not had the best upbringings and don't consider honor and lawfulness and being the good student to be all that integral to their existence. So I'm not going to hold them to the same standard that you or I might hold a police officer or a judge, a member of the community. So my question rooted to that, and I didn't get a chance to ask this and I'll ask you, is it possible to fix some of the problems within MMA when you've got that community that maybe is reluctant to do anything to rock the boat because of their place in it? It's very much a case of I'll sort it when it affects me. If it doesn't affect me, I'd very much like to not eradicate any opportunities that might come my way, despite the fact that that's entirely against their best interests ultimately.
How do I answer that one? It's interesting. Yes, there can. Okay, so
I mean, when the annals of power are geared against fighters, fighters as the commodity, and the annals of power are geared at the moment very much against them, when they don't have a fair stake in the direction of their genre of entertainment, who can affect change? I guess is the question, because it becomes very much a thing of how do you motivate people that are in a way reluctant to be motivated.
Sure. So what I would say is, okay, I was able to speak to some high school kids recently, and I asked them a question. And I asked them, who thinks boxing is broken? It's a very loaded question, obviously. I was just trying to see what kind of response that I would get. And basically every kid raised their hand. Not everyone, but basically every kid raised their hand. And then I said, would you change your view of boxing if I told you that you're right that it was broken, but that it was actually broken on purpose with the intent to save it? And they didn't quite know what to make of it, but that's really what has happened with boxing. I'll come back to your question. It's all related. Just let me get there. The reason I bring that up is because you had monopolistic concerns and other forms of corruption in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and all the way up to the 80s and 90s, certainly before the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act got fully extended, that required people to care enough to put some guardrails in place. That did actually break the sport in a way that I do think limits not individual bouts, obviously, but it limits how popular it can actually be. It does make all of the titles, makes it harder to understand. All of the different promoters makes it harder to follow than some more uniform places. But at the same time, and having done that, I know it seems this is crazy to say, but if you're asking which market is more equitable, the boxing market or the MMA market, it's not a contest. Boxing is vastly more equitable, vastly fairer in terms of power sharing. It's not even close. And so the point I would say is, listen, down to individualistic moralizing, I don't know what kind of impact you can have. I'm really not ready to punt on the idea that like it's wrong to ask people, like, you know, it's 2024. How the fuck are we relitigating whether or not we should treat gay people with humanity? I don't know. I don't know what you can really do about that, but I'm not really ready to punt on that. But as a separate question, that's one kind of issue. You're asking about actually affecting change. You can affect change, actually. And it has to be broader, and I think it has to be the kind of thing where you're bringing in the force of law to do it. So I guess the answer to the question would be, to the extent this is actually something that the law, some kind, either the justice system or whatever, the legislative system, whether it's the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, these kinds of things can actually introduce equitability. They can introduce fairness. They actually can introduce a better world insofar as those things are concerned. In terms of the actual culture, what I would say is, you know, the sport has taken a bizarre turn over the last few years. To me, it's entirely related to Dana White's personal transformation. And even that I'm not really bagging on. Like, people, it's not for me. I wouldn't follow the same one. But the point I want to make is this is why it's all related. People don't understand. If he took that turn and was just another matchroom boxing in the boxing world, right? That would have some effect, but it wouldn't have this vast effect on the industry. But because there is one dominant firm, they own 90% plus of the world's elite talent, and then in terms of the real elite talent, they own basically 100% of it, or pretty close to it. And they of every dollar made in MMA, the UFC makes 90 cents of it. It is such a dominant factor that it actually ends up changing the culture. I think if you had different parties jockeying for power that either the legislative or the justice system made possible, then what you would actually get is not having one hegemonic figure defining the terms of everything, culture, business, you name it. That to me would make it actually more equitable or different, or, you know, certainly different perspectives all the way around. In which case, it's like, if one person wants to go this direction, they can. If another person wants to go that direction, they can. What we have now in MMA is just one firm, one president, top down defining everything, and this is what you're seeing, I think, as a consequence.
And I agree. I would love to delve into that because again, the fact that there is only one figurehead, and we've had a very recent, or maybe not recent, example of something where it's like, right, this is the opportunity to hold feet to fire and completely squandered, and you go, okay, so that's a more complex topic than we have time to go into. Although I hope, and
You mean
I'm
like
sure
M&A
you will
Media
tackle it
not
at some
holding
point.
his feet to the fire?
So I'll just say it because again I don't mind calling some of this stuff out. When the Dana White stuff dropped and you saw the press conference afterwards, and you've seen some of the stuff that's happened with Vince McMahon since, you see what happens when you have a culture that is devised almost entirely by a single individual who is not motivated or inclined to listen to anyone that isn't directly profiting him. And the problem with that then is that how do you eradicate the culture that's fostered? Because you don't necessarily get rid of that with one person. You can get rid of Dana White, you can get rid of Vince McMahon, but in both instances, they have fostered cultures that will have lasting effects. And I wonder, with the case of fighter pay and obviously that going to court, and hopefully there being some legislative traction given to that, and obviously now with TKO putting pressure on WWE to make changes due to the sponsorship issues, I wonder though how long that takes to foster real change, to really see equity within the people that make the difference in those realms of entertainment, which is the fighters being treated fairly and paid commensurate to what their value is to the business. Same with wrestlers, but also just that going forward, that it's not another 30 years of discourse that's taken to get the next thing fixed. If there's another big issue that is like, well, hang on, we sorted out your pay, we sorted out your rights. We got you. We're paying you for the Rock stuff now. What more do you want? And it's right, but that was just the stuff that was unfair. That's the minimum. You've not even done the minimum. So the reason I asked the question of whether or not it's possible to fix MMA, and I asked that in a broad sense, is are there people within the industry that can affect change with the discourse that you see online, on your show, on other people's shows, or is it ultimately kind of more for the record, just so someone said something because it was the right thing to say at the right moment, rather than, oh, you can't say that, you might annoy somebody.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry,
2024 is going
there's
to
a
be.
lot to unpack there. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
I mean, I'll make it. I'll try to keep it as simple as I can, which is that 2024 is going to be a real weird year for the United States. You're asking more broadly, but there's a lot of ways that this all could go. I think my basic point would be, one, I think if Dana White left, it would or just say, hey, I'm done today. I don't want to do this anymore, and they had to appoint somebody else. To what extent would that change the culture? It would really depend on who that person is, certainly. But again, I just go back to what I had said previously. Two things. One, you're trying to get at improvement that I think is real. But first things first, they have to make the sport more equitable. And I honestly believe that not just people think that if, whatever fix people want for that, unionization, the Ali Act, the antitrust lawsuit, whatever your preferred fix is, people think that what you're fixing there is, in some sense, treatment, fairness, but really it's fighter pay. But I'm going to say it one more time. If you open up, for example, like this won't happen in April, even if the plaintiffs win, but there's a connected case to it. People don't realize this. There's two antitrust cases that are, it's all one, but they're different time periods, basically. One is the Lee case, one is the Cage and Johnson case. And it's just one is a period of time, and then the next one's the next period of time. The first one doesn't have any injunctive relief, which means they can't change any of the contracts. If they win, it's just for monetary value. And that will do nothing to the UFC. They have plenty of money for that. That's not really a big issue, which is why I think they're not really trying to settle. It's the other one that's now more important. That's the one where you get injunctive relief. So, for example, my point is if you have made it so that, and this is what they would be asking for, potentially up to a year only, but they'll probably get something like if they win, 2 years as a max UFC contract. 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a 2-year max UFC contract, you are going to rearrange the industry. You're going to rearrange it. And as other people gain and other entities gain more power, their cultural influence will have a say over the sport as well. In other words, it's not the same as like trying to fight whatever forces you don't like. It's about when you restructure the industry, the ways in which power gets established, the ways in which that influences the broader zeitgeist, the way in which that influences, again, the downstream effects of that in terms of what people are saying and doing and supporting and what causes they care about, or vice versa, or simply what worldview they espouse, all of that begins to gain more currency. It really has an enormous amount of downstream effects that have literally nothing to do with fighter pay. Your point is about something more specific and more important. And getting on Twitter and being like, I think this is a reprehensible statement. This will do nothing. This will do nothing. At least not right now. However, the other things that I've mentioned, I think actually would, both short and long term, have great effect. And so I just feel like it's much more interesting to me to put emphasis on that than the other thing.
Started off this interview using the word goober, and now we're getting into fighter equitability. Who knew? Anywho, let's. I want to talk about you. We're talking about wider issues that have got very little to do with your career. I want to ask something again, utilizing the famously accurate tool known as Wikipedia. I doubt very much this is true, but it's a date that it's thrown out, and there's something poetic about it. It mentioned that you became a devotee, whatever that means, of MMA in 2004, but I imagine you were studying martial arts or some degree of physical activity prior to that. So, but we'll use 2004 as a nice round date because it's 20 years. After 20 years plus, thanks Wikipedia, of following MMA, what is it to you now? Does it have a resonance? Is there something that comes to mind when you think of the term MMA, or when you get up in the morning and you know that it's going to consume your being for at least 7 to 10 hours a day? What is MMA to you?
Man, its relationship has changed. Everything about it. I mean, 2004. That's somewhat correct. 2004. There was periods where I went in and out of it from 1994ish, 5ish to 2004. But I really began to kick up things back in like late 2003, early 2004. Anyway, what is it? Jesus Christ. I would say that yes. I don't really know how you can be in fight sports for very long if your relationship to it doesn't change over time. There can be exceptions to that. Bob Arum has been promoting boxing people don't even realize he's like promoting, Naoya Inoue now. The guy was promoting fucking Muhammad Ali. I mean, it's just insane, the guy's longevity and people before that as well. And so in some sense, his relationship to the sport hasn't changed. But for other people, I do think it changes a lot. So for me, it was something of a North Star. I did like sports growing up to various degrees, but MMA was the only one that I ever felt like I understood. Like fully, like X's and O's, like I fully had, not in 2004 that I did, but whatever knowledge I had there was much better than whatever American football or soccer knowledge or whatever that I had. And then, immersing myself in it and then becoming a part of it to a degree was really, it was just had a profound effect on me. And I just remember thinking that like for example, like take Taylor Swift's music. It's not for me. I hear it. I don't like it, but I don't have a strong like reaction to it one way or the other. It's just sort of like, music you hear. To me, it's like music you hear in an elevator. And for fans, that might sound insulting. I don't mean it to be. I just mean that it doesn't do one thing or the other to me, right? But MMA did a lot to me. It did a lot to me. It did a lot about capturing my imagination. It captured my professional interest. It changed me as a person to a degree. I mean, it made me understand myself better to a degree. Like, it really did a lot for me. So at various intervals, it meant different things. I'm at the point now where I certainly have a much more transactional relationship with MMA. Again, I do not like MMA culture. I think it's largely awful and bankrupt. And I think that people believe that if you like cage fighting, that means you have to have a worldview where you have absolutely traded in having empathy for other people or having just a sort of a basic humanity to the way in which you view the world, which is simply not true. But of course, there is a lot of those forces making those claims day to day. And again, how do you fight that? I don't really know, except to the way you live. I will say that I'm at a stage now, after all this time, where my technical knowledge of the sport has gotten significantly better. And that really is my main source of joy, to be honest with you. It's the puzzle, it's the problem solving, it's the rational thought that has to go into there, it's the sneakiness of the attack. There's so much poetry is not the right word. There's so much plot in a fight, so much that's happening that is about these incredibly interesting forms of strategy and tactics and everything else. And then again, to what you mentioned before, like psychologically, what it does to people in these moments who have to fight out of attack or who have to, finish whatever the situation might be. It really, those things to me are insanely interesting. I've not lost any interest in that. In fact, if anything, that interest has only grown. But in terms of like the culture, like, man, this is how someone okay, if someone's been around MMA for like 15 years and they don't feel weird about it, then they're a fucked up person, right? I mean, that's just the reality. Like, I've trained at gyms, and then they went through scandal after I left about all this insane levels of mistreatment that went through. And then you see how fighter pay actually works, and like newer fans who haven't seen the old guys get old, and then what state they're in, and then like what this does to you. I mean, I don't know how you can watch a cycle of heroes rise, fall, leave the sport, and then struggle, and then not think to yourself that fighter pay is actually important. I actually think you have to be fucking deranged to not have to mentally grapple with these kinds of things. So my relationship has changed. It has changed to MMA. MMA is always going to have weird, cool stuff about it. Not just in the fights themselves. It attracts different people. It attracts weird people. Matt Horvich, or I think Matt Horwich is his name. He used to be this guy who fought in the IFL, who had these weird sort of psychedelic philosophy, and it was just all these different cross sections of people you would never ever meet. And I think that part is still true, and that part is still quite beautiful. But I don't have that relationship to MMA in that way anymore. I'm glad I did. It did a lot for me, but you just can't see what I've seen and come out the other side and be like, hey, everything is great as the day I first found this. It's not.
I can sympathize because I have the same relationship with professional wrestling. I know your opinions of professional wrestling are not the fondest, but it's the same feeling of I haven't been an avid wrestling watcher since the Saudi Arabia shows in Jeddah. And when Jamal Khashoggi was working, they went on with a show the next day, and you go, I think I'm done. So, anyways, I don't want to push on that. I need to crank out a couple quick questions, and then we've got to let you rock and roll, because you've got a million things to cover and no time to do it. So, quick fire questions. I'm sorry, again, they're not funny, but I tried. You're a Real Madrid fan.
Yeah.
Is there any wiggle room on that? Arsenal are really good right now, and their kit's really fun, and the stadium's awesome, and we've got some very young talent that promise not to go anywhere for a few years. And yes, you've got Jude Bellingham, and yes, you've got big stadium and all the money and the gold kit and what have you. But
I like Arsenal. A buddy of mine is a big-time Arsenal fan. Erdegaard played with Madrid, and now I think is y'all's captain, if I'm not mistaken. But there's no wiggle room on that. You have no fucking idea how much joy Real Madrid gives me, and if you did, you wouldn't even ask that question.
Okay, yeah, I'm never going to sell you, because the fandom in Arsenal is probably more toxic than anywhere else in the world. We hate our own players. That's what good fans we are. Okay,
yeah,
second question.
I've seen you fuckers yell, "You're not fit to wear the shirt." I've seen that.
We once booed a man off the pitch while he was throwing his shirt at the ground, having nearly been sent off, and then a year later, everyone was like, "Oh, you going? Oh, come on, sign the." It's like, dudes, I don't know what's wrong with you, but again, Arsenal fans, you need to buck your fucking ideas up. But never mind. Favorite Star Wars moment?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I know you're a Chewbacca fan, so I'm assuming it's something.
This is a pro Chewbacca household. This is a pro Chewbacca. Favorite Star Wars moment? You know what? It's shitty to pick this one because it's complete fan service. It's total fan service. But when in what's the half one where Vader it's the precursor to A New Hope. Rogue One, where he boards the ship and
he goes mental at the end with the lightsaber.
Yeah, he goes fucking mental as shit. Oh yes, they made that scene so that nerds would geek out, but mission accomplished. It got me to nerd out.
I'm not gonna lie, we sat through that movie going, dude, I don't care about any of these characters or what's happening. And then when he hit his lightsaber and he went mental, we both stood up in our chairs and went, worth it. Worth it for the movie. Okay, cool. They fixed Anakin in 2 minutes. Having ruined him systematically for 3 minutes, they fixed him in 2 minutes. 2 minutes is all it took. Unbelievable.
I loved it.
Okay, and we'll go final one. Most rewatchable moment from your MMA fandom. So it could be anything you saw on TV, on a pay-per-view, or personally. What's the one moment that you relive the most in your head?
I'm gonna say, from a fan perspective, probably one of BJ Penn's walkouts. Would walk out to the guy whose last name I cannot pronounce, but they call him Brother. Israel is his first name. He's got this like incredibly long Hawaiian last name. He was a really big, morbidly obese guy, but he had like the most Hawaiian sounding name and music and everything about it. And I know everyone talks about Max Holloway's Hawaiian kickboxer as like of Hawaii. People don't understand who, like the newer fans have no concept of BJ Penn, which to me is like so fucking heartbreaking, because it's hard to describe somebody who had the game and would make you think that like a person could actually do magic. BJ Penn, to me, when it was at the peak of it, felt like that was as close human magic as you ever were going to see. And his walkouts having this, I always believe that the best walkouts are the ones where the music closely matches the culture from which the guy comes from. And that was a great example of it. And I just remember just different ones where I can remember where I was, like the Joe Stevenson one or other ones. But dude, he would come out with those and you would hear it. Oh my Lord, man. It was just one of these hugely impactful moments. I go back to those all the time, to be honest with you.
I think that's as good a place to dismount, because I will go backwards and forwards on you on a million of those different topics. But just one last little thing, because I think it's worth getting on camera, because I know you have to bounce, is from a fan's perspective, I can't tell you how much I appreciate everything you've done from the perspective of you introduced a video once by saying, I want to clear something up. I don't make these videos for donks who know what they're doing. I make these videos for donks that don't. And as a donk who has no fucking idea what I'm watching 90% of the time, but can appreciate what you mentioned with that statement about MMA being like, this is one of the most fundamentally intricate and yet physical and yet mental and yet philosophical and sometimes spiritual experiences that one can subject themselves to. And I want to understand, even if I have a limited ability to do so. And you, more than pretty much anybody else, has made that possible for me. And I hope I speak for anybody else who feels the same way when I just say thank you so much for every hour, every minute that you spent researching and putting together videos and trying to eliminate all the excess information, all the things you do to try and make it compatible with people like me. Thank you so much, man.
Well, that's very nice of you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you said that. Not so much because it's a nice thing that you said, but I mean, I keep sort of repeating myself here on this interview. It's very simple. I mean, if you look at the books behind me, you will find very few fiction books, which is really a weak spot that I have. I should read more fiction. I just don't. And the reason I don't, because every time I put down one of the books that I'm reading that's a nonfiction book, I've got another 3 of them lined up because I've got so many questions about the way the world works. Why is this true, and why are we seeing this phenomenon, and what does this mean? And I never regret reading those books. I just don't make enough time for fiction, and blind spot there. But what I'm trying to make to you is like, I have often looked at MMA coverage this way. Why does the business work this way? Why does this technique work in this circumstance? Why do they, for example, have you ever noticed 2 wrestlers, and I'm talking like Olympic or college wrestling, why do they shake hands after MMA is happening that makes them want to do that? I've only ever just tried to answer those questions. It's the same questions basically that everybody else has had. I've just tried to take the time that I've had to go and dig into it, and I got a head start on a lot of things so that I was able to get a position in the market, and that's it. So sometimes the simplest questions with the simplest answers are the most important ones, and I'm glad people like you and hopefully some other ones have found some value in it. So thank you very much.